Elias was a man who lived by the rule of the protractor and the immense weight of reinforced concrete. As a world-renowned successful architect, his world was one of precise measurements and structural integrity. Every calculation mattered. If a thing could not be calculated, it did not exist. If a foundation could not be tested, it could not be trusted. For 40 years, this philosophy served him well, leading him to the heights of his profession. But now, sitting in a plastic chair as brittle as his own spirit, Elias realized that all the steel in the world could not hold up the ceiling of his life, which was currently collapsing around him. Before him lay Clara, his 7-year-old daughter. She had once been a whirlwind of vibrant, bright laughter who defied the laws of physics. Now, she was nearly invisible beneath a tangle of translucent tubes and the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator. The terrible diagnosis was an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor. It was a biological failure that no blueprint could fix and no surgery could reach. The doctors, men of modern science like himself, used terms like terminal and palliative, words that Elias recognized as a polite way of saying there was no hope left in the realm of the physical. The ICU was a place of merciless, sterile white light and the oppressive smell of industrial cleaner. It was a cathedral of medicine, where the only hymns were the constant beep of heart monitors and the soft scuff of nurses' shoes. Every sound felt like a hammer blow against Elias's heart. He watched the cold digital readouts, seeing the painful jagged lines of Clara's life force grow flatter and more erratic with every passing hour. The hollow silence in the room was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating shroud that demanded an answer he simply did not have. His devout mother had visited earlier, her soul tempered by deep faith and lifelong devotion. She placed a small, amber bottle of simple oil and a prayer card on the bedside table. She quietly told him about Saint Charbel, the hermit of the ancient Lebanese mountains who worked wonders for those whom the world had abandoned. Elias had desperately snapped at her in a jagged edge of grief. He told her that oil would not shrink a mass of malignant cells, and that prayers were just whispers directed at an empty sky. His mother simply kissed his forehead and whispered that when logic fails, love remains. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the lead surgeon slowly entered the room. His face was a mask of professional regret. He did not need to speak for Elias to know the unspoken verdict. The scientific certainty of death had been established. Clara's vital signs were crashing, and the grim medical team could do no more to prevent the inevitable. Before we continue this journey into the unknown, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The doctor left, and Elias was left in the gathering shadows of the room, a man who had built towers but could not save his child. He was alone. The logic that had been his armor for decades now felt like a suffocating cage. He looked at the sacred prayer card his mother had left on the table. In his staggering desperation, he reached out and picked it up. His hands trembled. He was not a man of faith, he was a man of data, but the stark data said his daughter was gone, and his silent heart refused to accept the calculation. He pulled the card close, his eyes blurring with tears. He began to read the words, the oration of Saint Charbel, out of total crushing desperation. He finished the first line, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The room was cold, regulated to a precise temperature to preserve what little was left. But as the final syllable left his lips, the sharp, chemical scent of the ICU began to vanish. It was replaced by something impossible. A rich, heavy, unmistakable fragrance of sweet desert roses began to bloom in the air, swirling around Clara's fragile bed like an invisible mist. It was a miraculous, vivid scent from a land he had not seen in years, a scent that should not exist in this place of death. The fragrance of roses was more than a scent. It was an anchor in a sea of hopelessness. Elias felt the paper of the prayer card grow warm, as if the ink were vibrating with hidden power. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking as he began the formal oration of Saint Charbel. Each word felt like a stone being placed at the base of a new foundation, a structure not made of steel, but of something far more resilient. He spoke of the hermit of Lebanon, the silent intercessor who found God in the stillness of Anaya. As he prayed, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator seemed to fade. Elias closed his eyes, and the sterile white walls of the ICU dissolved. In their place rose the rugged peaks of the Mount Lebanon range. He could feel the cool breeze and hear the distant chime of a monastery bell. Standing amidst the ancient cedars was a figure in a simple black habit, his face obscured, but radiating a warmth that surpassed the sun. It was Saint Charbel, standing in a pool of soft golden light. The hermit didn't speak, but his presence conveyed absolute peace. In that visionary moment, the architect saw his own life not as success, but as a hollow shell. This vision shattered when the ICU door creaked open. A nurse entered, her movements practiced and somber. She looked at the monitors and then at Elias with a pity that stung. She placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered that he should take these final moments to say goodbye. She told him the brain activity was nearly non-existent and the heart was losing its rhythm. To her, the scent of roses was just a trick of a grieving mind. This was the crushing weight of physical reality, the data Elias had once worshipped. The nurse saw death, but Elias, fueled by his vision, felt defiance. He ignored the nurse's suggestion of a final farewell. Instead, he deepened his prayer, moving into the core of the intercession. He reached for the amber bottle of Saint Charbel's oil. His voice became a low, steady chant, a plea for the impossible miracle. He wasn't just asking for a biological correction, he was bargaining with the divine. He promised that if Clara's breath were returned, his own life would no longer be a monument to his ego. He vowed a life of service to things that cannot be measured. He uncorked the bottle, and the scent of roses intensified, filling the small cubicle until it was palpable. With a hand that had once designed skyscrapers but now shook, Elias touched a drop of the oil to Clara's pale forehead. He traced the sign of the cross. At that moment, the heart rate monitor, which had been a sluggish beat of 30, suddenly spiked. The jagged line on the screen surged upward. The nurse gasped, checking the leads, certain that a sensor had malfunctioned. But the pulse was there, strong, rhythmic and vital, defying every medical expectation. As he watched the screen, Elias felt a strange sensation. It was as if a layer of ice that had encased his heart for decades was cracking. The bitterness toward his mother's faith and the cold atheism he used as a shield were melting. He wasn't just praying for his daughter's body, he was witnessing the resurrection of his own soul. He realized the miracle of transformation had already begun within him during the depths of his prayer. Suddenly, the equipment began to beep frantically. These weren't the mournful tones of a heart stopping. Instead, they were the urgent signals of a system being flooded with power. Every sensor on Clara's body registered a sudden, impossible surge of life, as if her cells were being electrified by an unseen force. The clinical silence was gone, replaced by a roar of mechanical panic that mirrored the storm of hope rising in Elias's chest. The chaotic symphony of alarms summoned the medical team like a clarion call. Doctors and nurses burst into the room, their faces set in the grim determination of those expecting a code blue, a final struggle against the inevitable. They pushed past Elias, who stood frozen, his hand still damp with the sacred oil. The lead surgeon reached for the defibrillator, but his hand stopped mid-air as he looked at the monitors. The vital signs weren't flatlining. They were robust, humming with a rhythmic strength that defied the pathology of the last 6 months. Amidst the frantic movement, a small, parched voice cut through the mechanical noise. Clara, who had been submerged in a deep coma for weeks, slowly opened her eyes. The clouded, distant look was gone, replaced by a clear, lucid spark. She looked at her father and whispered a single word, asking for water. The room fell into a stunned, crystalline silence. The nurse, who had only moments ago suggested Elias say his goodbyes, dropped a tray of instruments, the metallic clang echoing the shock shared by everyone present. The next hour was a whirlwind of clinical confusion. The surgeon, refusing to believe his own eyes, ordered immediate emergency scans. He suspected a temporary surge of adrenaline or a fluke in the equipment, but as the new images appeared on the digital screens, the medical staff huddled in disbelief. The aggressive, inoperable mass that had been strangling Clara's brainstem had not just stabilized. It had shriveled to a mere fraction of its size. It was as if a fire that had been raging for months had been extinguished by a single drop of rain. The surgeon paced the hallway, clutching the printouts, his logical mind searching for a variable he had missed. When he finally spoke to Elias, his voice lacked its usual clinical authority. He admitted, with a humility that only a man of science facing the divine can possess, that there was no medical precedent for such a reversal. He confessed that according to every textbook and every scan from that morning, Clara should have been gone. Instead, she was sitting up, her color returning, the shadow of death having been chased away by a light he could not quantify. 6 months later, the sterile white walls of the hospital were a distant memory. The air was no longer thick with the scent of antiseptic, but with the crisp, ancient wind of the Lebanese mountains. Elias stood at the entrance of the monastery of Saint Maron in Anaya, holding Clara's hand. She was vibrant, her laughter ringing out across the stone courtyards, a living testament to the impossible. They had traveled across the world to the tomb of Saint Charbel to fulfill the promise Elias had made in the darkness of the ICU. As they approached the iron-wrought tomb where the hermit's body had once rested, Elias felt the same warmth he had experienced in his vision. He knelt, no longer the arrogant architect of steel and logic, but a humble man who understood that the most important structures are built in the spirit. He laid the small amber bottle and the well-worn prayer card on the stone. He realized that the miracle was twofold. His daughter's body had been healed, but his own soul had been reconstructed from the ruins of his doubt. This story is not just a chronicle of one man's journey. It is a beacon for anyone standing in the shadow of their own terminal situation. Whether you are facing a medical diagnosis that offers no hope, a financial collapse that feels like a tomb, or a family rift that seems permanent, the intercession of Saint Charbel remains a powerful bridge to the divine. This prayer is for the desperate, for those who have reached the end of their own strength and need the miraculous intervention of a saint who lived in total silent union with God. To perform this oration, one must approach with the same raw honesty that Elias found. You must strip away your skepticism and offer your pain as a sacrifice. You must pray with the certainty that you are being heard, not by a distant deity, but by a friend who spent his life in the mountains of Lebanon precisely so he could listen to the cries of the suffering today. Saint Charbel never leaves a sincere cry for help unanswered. He is the hermit of miracles, the silent worker who moves in the spaces where science and logic reach their limits. As you finish this story, carry the scent of the roses in your heart. If you are in need of your own impossible miracle, do not hesitate to ask. Share your needs and your prayers in the comments below, creating a chain of faith that spans the globe. Let us know where you are seeking healing. And remember that when the world says finished, God often says beginning. The light that touched Clara is available to you too, waiting only for the moment you decide to reach out and believe in the power of the invisible.